Hello, folks. My name is Corey McCarthy. You guys know a little bit about me. You know, I I'm hosting with a couple others the Factivism podcast. I'm sitting here with an esteemed coworker of mine, Brendan Hahsey. I hope I said it right. I don't like messing up people's names, right?
You did get it right, but don't feel bad. No one gets it right the first time. My name
Okay.
is, you say it Hahsey, like it rhymes. My dad likes to joke. It rhymes with classy, and you don't pronounce the second H, but that H,
Ah,
and
okay.
so
So
it's
Hahsey.
it's Hahsey. Just
Hahsey.
Hahsey.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
So
Uh,
that's a complicated. It's a good icebreaker at the beginning of the year with the kids, though, because when I'm learning their names, I always say, "Well, I don't know how to pronounce your names all yet.
right.
But you don't know. None of you can say mine right the first time. We're all gonna get this right eventually."
It's all right. You know what? It's all up. It's like a learning curve, anyway. So don't worry about it. I'm definitely glad to have you on. We've been trying to get this for a while, but I'm so happy I got you now. I appreciate you and a lot of the Everett folks as well who have welcomed me into the community and really showed me that they are ready for to take the next step in not just student achievement, but building towards student equity, educator equity, and joining the fight together. I think in the long run, personally, I feel about how I feel about Everett. I think it could be the best urban district school in the state. That's just my personal bias for me and the kids. I know kids are the same everywhere, but it just feels a lot different here, and I love it. So you get a chance if you want to right now, just give us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, I'm Brendan Hahsey. I'm a social studies teacher at Everett High School. I teach ninth grade U.S. history, mostly U.S. History 1, which is kind of the first half of U.S. history from like the French and Indian War to about almost to World War One. And I've been doing that for 9 years now. This is my 9th year at Everett High School, and in addition to teaching, I coach at the high school too. I'm the head cross country coach, and
Nice.
I'm also an assistant on the track team, and so I'm around the school a lot after school too, coaching most of the year. So
Great.
yeah.
So for some of the students who are listening, I always make, if they are, I always try to have our adults tell us what college they go to. So what college do you go to?
I went to Bates College, which is up in Lewiston, Maine, about 2.5 hours, cold, like north of here. But it was a good place. It was the right place for me. It was it was great academically. I also got to compete on the cross country and track teams up there as well, where I made a lot of lifetime friendships and stuff there with the coaches. And I probably wouldn't be it's kind of how I became a coach. I did it myself. I got so much out of sports as growing up, and so to be able to kind of give back some of that experience to my kids it's a great honor and a privilege and a pleasure. Like it really is. It's I've always loved doing. It's been a great part of being at Everett, since I started.
Yeah, I would definitely lucky. We definitely feel lucky in that sense as well. So let's get right into it. Sure. I, as a social studies teacher, I feel like a lot of social studies and history teachers are bearing the burden of why didn't I know this about history, especially Black history? Why don't I know this and why don't I know that? Right? And I in many respects it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
But when did it really hit you that you have to rework some of what we're teaching, or what you are teaching, making that really relevant to not just Black students, but all students, because I think, I always speak about how this benefits white students as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it is something that I think that when you get into, I mean, I know what I was taught growing up, and, you know, it was a certain version of history. And it was, I think as I got older, I had a really good teacher in grad school. Like, I got my master's from Tufts,
Ah,
teaching. And this guy, Steve Cohen, who was over there, was a really good teacher about this stuff. So it was that. And it was, so that was part of it, that the program was really good there. It was also kind of an education for me, as like I became an adult and started kind of, you know, like learning about the world, shall we say.
right.
And I kind of like, I think, I mean, I know this is a little old for the kids, for our students, but I kind of was the war in Iraq, which, you know, started in 2003, you know,
Right.
was like, I kind of like had consumed certain news sources and things that had certain assumptions about, you know, how things would go and what was going on in that part of the world. And then it didn't pan out that way. You know, like it didn't, the mainstream media story, you know, kind of fell apart pretty quick, right? There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Right.
We were not prepared to, you know, occupy the country. You know, there was tons of
Right.
mistakes, and tons of people died. And it was kind of a very like a wake up call of like, I have to like I have to kind of look for new things. And so it started out kind of about, specifically about Iraq and how that went so wrong. And I started I started reading Atlantic Magazine, which I'd never read before. And I read it because some of the people in there were kind of right about the war. And then there was a guy who was not really well known then. He's very well known now, but Ta-Nehisi Coates
Ah,
wrote for the Atlantic. And
yeah.
I was at one point in my life, I loved blogs, and I
Right.
started reading blogs. And
Same here. Same here. Same
yeah,
here. Yeah.
and he had a blog when he was really very, you know, very
Green.
kind of obscure.
Yeah.
And I started reading him because he loved the Civil War, you know,
Mhm.
like the study of the Civil War. And I like the study, you know, the Civil War.
Right.
And I teach it now, and it's like, to me, one of the, the highlights of the course in some
Right.
sense. And so I started reading him, and, you know, kind of going on this journey, like kind of like learning a different version of U.S. history, maybe more in-depth version,
Right.
and you know, of it. And something that is, you know, that is some sense the traditional textbook version wasn't getting it. You know what I mean? Wasn't
Right.
telling the
Right. There
story.
wasn't a. There was a disalignment.
Yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, it was a disalignment, and it wasn't telling the whole story. And
Right.
if you just read the textbook, then the world was confusing, you know, like in
Right.
some sense, because you're like, well, I know the, you know, so this shouldn't, you know, but then, like I said, kind of like almost like where had read about Iraq, and then the real Iraq wasn't like what I was told in
Right.
the New York Times or whatever. Like, it was like, well, there's more to this story than that, you know. And it was like, and I knew, and it wasn't that I didn't know any history, you know, Black history at all, but
Right.
like it was like, but it was more like, it was getting much more in depth to it, you know. Like, I mean, I just think about like when I teach the Civil War, like, you know, the version of the Civil War, you know, is very like, you know, about the North winning and ending slavery, and it's very Lincoln centered, right? You
Right.
know,
Right.
I'm a big fan, and to this day, I'm a huge Abraham Lincoln fan. You know, I think he deserves, you know, a ton of praise. But I think a fuller version of the war is, it's not that Lincoln, you know, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, you know, like, and that's the end of the story. You know, that was how it happened. It was like, you know, from the day the war start, you know, well, even maybe without even getting to what happens before, the moment the war starts, from the very beginning, the slaves start running away, right? You know, they
Right.
start running into Union lines, and kind of like and at first they're being sent home, right? They're actually, Union commanders are actually sending them back, like, and then someone says, well, wait a second, what are we doing here, you know? And they start allowing them, you know, to kind of stay, you know, for not because they're all such just wonderful people, but part just to hurt the slaveholders who they're fighting. But
Right.
then, but they kind of start forcing the issue, right? A war that Lincoln starts fighting is, you know, he says, I'm just about saving the Union. The escaped slaves and their arrival in Union lines is the beginning. They're the ones who really push Lincoln and others to transforming the nature of the war from a war to, you know, save the Union, to a war to end slavery. And, you
Right.
know, and it's like they are very much uh, active players in their own emancipation, right? You
Right.
know, they're not some sort of waiting for Lincoln to come and save them. You know, they are, you know, they're doing that, and then they're, of course, they're joining the army, you know, and fighting, and all throughout the war, despite the fact that if they get captured, they're going to be, either re-enslaved or murdered on the spot.
Right.
And
Right.
both things happen.
Lynch the whole nine. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They're going to be, and they're, all this is going on, and they're very much, and so they're very much like kind of pushing the narrative forward and pushing us towards the 13th Amendment, like the people themselves. And so that if you're really telling the story of, how does slavery be emancipated, Lincoln deserves his praise, and he plays his part, and that's really important.
Yeah. Lincoln pushed the button, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Right. The full story is not being told. I feel like most Black academic journalists are very much like Coates. They love the civil rights. They love the Civil War because of the intricacies and the lack of truth telling in the Civil War. Like you even just highlighted a couple of things as well. Very few people know, Black and white, that Lincoln pushed the button, but Lincoln also gave reparations to slave owners, which is it's sort of like, all right, it's the great game of politics. Yes, let them go, but it's profitable for you to let them go. I think looking at that really, it really just prompted me to really help and work with people through the events of the Civil War. I feel like as a nation, I think we have this obsession with heroes, and our timeline is not really a timeline. It's just based on heroes. Let's look at Black history, right? Harriet Tubman, all the way to Martin Luther King. In between, there's all these other folks. And even if you look at our regular US history, there's all these timeline of heroes, right? And I think now we should just, for me, this to me personally, I always look at social studies teachers and history and civics teachers. I want them, and I think many of them, like you, are just like, all right, let's just be truth tellers now, right? Like, let's just tell the truth, right? So as we shift in our conversation here, in regards to how history has been kind and not kind to the politics of race, how did we get here with the Capitol riots? Like, a lot of people, the common person who's just not really seeking anything, right, is like, oh, this had very little to do with race, or this had very little to do with it. But how did we? Because I know when I went to DC last year, I was on Capitol Hill and I couldn't even get close. And I was like, you know what? I don't even want to go there because I'm gonna die, right? Like, I don't want to. I'd love to go give Ayanna Pressley, give her a fist bump, something, right? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going there. How did we get here? And how? That's one. And two, how are we supposed to tell the history? It's like, how is this story going to pan out? How are we going to tell the kids?
Well, it's still ongoing, right?
Right.
Really, we're in the middle of it, right? I mean, right. And I know that sometimes you feel like I'm so sick of living through historic things, right? We're living through a pandemic that's historic, and it's just like there's a weight in that, and it's tough, but it is what it is, right? We're here, right. We're here now, and I would, well, I mean, how we got here, I would say, is we go back to Barack Obama getting elected in 2008, right? That's like a major historic moment, right? And of course, as you know, like anytime we've had a moment of Black folks getting ahead, we have a backlash, right? And that goes back to ancient time, as far back as we are as a country. And so so you have the rise of Obama, and he gets elected, and then Trump is actually on the scene pretty soon afterwards, questioning Obama's birth certificate, right? Mm-hmm. He is saying that he's not born, and if you don't know, you have to be born in this country, you can't be an immigrant to be president, and it's the only job in the country that requires that. And Obama, of course, was born here in Hawaii, but Trump starts questioning him, like that he said, well, I don't really know if he's really born here or whatever, and really kind of and starts questioning, and this is there's a real bad history here of of saying that if you are non-white voters essentially are not totally legitimate, right?
Right.
Like and he's questioning Obama's legitimacy there, and he uses this, right, and this racism is his propeller from being a failed businessman to being a successful politician,
Right.
and
Essentially, fundamentally, he is. Right. All he is playing the politics. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, right. No, totally. And and he is using that, and he has a skill set, and one of his skills is lack of shame, right?
Right.
He will say the thing, the racist thing that other people might be too embarrassed to say out loud, and he'll just come out and say
Right.
it, and there's a certain group of people that like enjoy that, right? There is a thrill to that, and it really helps him, rise up, rise to the top of the Republican ranks, even though a lot of people are treating him like a joke for a very long time. There's this, even in the 2016 when he runs, all the other candidates are attacking each other because they assume he will, at some
Right.
point, implode because it's too
Well,
absurd to think that
right. Our reality star. Right.
yeah, there's no way this guy can win, and and then he does. Of course, he does. And because he, in some sense, for a lot of people, he's the bully they want out there, right? They don't like the change that's happening in the country. They don't like the new multiracial America that Barack Obama represents, right? That that is rising in the demographics in the country, and he's the answer, right? He's the guy that's going to fight
Right.
all that and push back against all that for you, right? And then it works, right? He gets the nomination, and really through a bit of a fluke, right? He gets in, and he doesn't get a majority of the vote, but he gets the majority of the electoral college, and
Right.
weeks by, and he gets in, and then and so he's there as the backlash, and he's and this, but but I would say this about talking about history. Trump is like, and there's a lot of people who are actually like they're just so shocked by him, right? Like they can't believe. And then the New York Times spends 4 years interviewing rural white voters in diners, trying to kind of like get to the bottom of this whole Trump thing.
But he's
And
not the new.
yeah, exactly. That's where I'm going here. Is that
Yeah.
it's not new? Like if you were an American who was alive in like 1900, you recognize him. He's everywhere, right? There are guys like him all over America, especially in the Jim Crow South, right?
Yes.
So that they get their rise by appealing to racism and coming to the top of the political order that way, right? And I would say if you think about like the closest parallel, before we get into like January 6th, is there is in and there's a lot this violence happens, it overthrows Reconstruction. Reconstruction ends through a violent terror campaign, right, to end it. I mean, a free and fair election in the South in a lot of these states would have yielded a Republican government committed to racial equality, and so you don't allow a free and fair election, right? All during Jim Crow, there is the violence of the Ku Klux Klan and other groups that
Depression.
that stop free and fair elections from happening, right? If there's a free and fair election, I mean, I think it's 3 states, they're Florida, South Carolina, and Mississippi. The majority of the people in those states are former slaves. So if they are just all allowed to vote, they're going to win. Their preferred candidate's going to win. So you don't let them vote, right? Which is, we need to touch to our modern voter suppression that's going on right now. But the violence is there. There's this violent backlash, and they did this, all across southern state. One of the actually famous one I was just thinking about recently was there was a government in Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898, and it's called a fusion ticket. There was a political party that arises for a little while in North Carolina, especially in this era, and it's a multiracial party, white and black folks together, mostly poor people who work together to get elected to try to institute a government that will give a fair shake to the working man of all races in North Carolina. And it's very popular for a couple of elections, and it's terrifying for the kind of entrenched white power structure that is now faced with a multiracial racial coalition of people who are, voting for their economic interests, right?
Right.
Economic redistribution, investment in public schools, and
Right. Right.
all these things they can have. And so in 1898, they stage a violent coup in Wilmington, North Carolina, and they just start killing Black folks some of them just kind of at random, just walking down the street, and then they go up to the courthouse and they remove the elected government at gunpoint. They put a gun to the head of all the elected leaders in Wilmington, and they say, "You have to, you got to go. Like, you're resigning as of right now." And they, of course, not wanting to get shot in the head, they
Right.
sign their names and resign. And then immediately, leaders of that violent coup install themselves as the local leadership in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Wilmington had been, I don't think it is now, but it was at the time the biggest city in North Carolina, and it was majority African American at the time. And then of course a lot of people flee the city afterwards because they no longer feel safe. This is the era of the Great Migration, and people are starting to leave. And but they won't. And this isn't like, I guess to say this is a terrible, violent, awful thing, but it credentials the people involved with it. Though the white folks who do this, 5 of the next 6 governors of North Carolina were involved in this. All right, they are actually participants in this race riot, and they
Right.
participants in this coup, and they murder people, right? They kill people, and they get away with it, right? They not only do they not go to jail, they become the highest echelon of leadership in the state of North Carolina. And
Nothing new. Nothing new. It's the same theme. Nothing new. Go ahead.
Nothing new. So this is the template, right? And so Trump is a figure like that, right? His qualification for office is, in some sense, I share your prejudice and I'll be mean to the people that you don't like, right? And then he gets in office and he does it, right? And he's separating families at the border, right? He's destroying families at the border, and he is he's really trying to restrict immigration, right? There's illegal immigration. He has a ban on immigration from Muslim majority countries, right? That he puts in place, and it's all about trying to stop this change in demographics that's happening in America, right? That we are, that you think of like the time of the Civil Rights Movement, we're like, I think 87% white in America, right? And about 13% Black, and that's the racial component.
That's it, right? Nobody else is here yet.
And there's a lot. Then everybody else.
Oh, yeah, the Native Americans at that time there was genocide. Yeah, they were. Yeah.
They were very small. I mean, I think they were a little bigger by the 1960s, but by the 1900, there's less than 1 million Native Americans left in the country, and you have and that's it. And then as part of the Civil Rights Movement, everyone knows about the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, but they also changed the nation's immigration laws in 1865, not in
1965, yeah.
And they no longer put favorable treatment towards European immigrants, and they start to go, and then the demographics of Europe change, so immigration even falls more than it might have, just because of that. And at the same time, people start migrating here from other parts of the world for the first time, and it kind of compounds year after year after year, and it takes a while, right? It doesn't the change isn't overnight. It's kind of a slow generational thing. But by 2008, when Barack Obama comes along, the change is enough that he can be elected, right? And that was something that even 20 years earlier, he couldn't have done, right? He got the same, like
not coming after Reagan.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really telling thing about this. Mike Dukakis, right, the former governor of Massachusetts, runs in 1988 and gets killed, creamed, right? And Barack Obama got roughly the same amount of the white vote as Mike Dukakis did, right? Except one of them got killed and one of them didn't. Well, what's the difference? The demographics of the country are just vastly different, by 2008, and they're even changing more since that time. So there becomes this, you've seen this as this has happened. There's always been this thing of like, the Republican Party, as this has gone on, so well, the Republican Party is going to have to change to appeal to the new America, right? It's going to have to change to appeal to the changing demographics of the country. And there is, at different point, there are, attempts sometimes of immigration reform led by Republicans that ultimately kind of fail for very, because there isn't enough of support in the party anymore for that stuff, right?
Correct.
Like Ronald Reagan in the 1980s offers what now we call an amnesty to undocumented immigrants, and that's the hero of conservatism in the 1980s, but the coalition isn't feeling under threat then because the demographics are so different.
But you're right. The disparity is so great. Right.
The disparity is so great that's like, sure, we can legalize these people. I'm not,
right. I'm
not
worried.
all that worried about it. But now it's very different, right? And so the Obama tries to they try to pass immigration reform when Obama's first in office. It fails. He ultimately does kind of legalize the Dreamers, but he has to do it through executive order. So they're always been kind of in this legal, limbo ever since, and they could, Trump tried to pull it away, and he kind of got blocked on a legal technicality as to that really kind of saved it. And even though no one really could contemplate what it would mean if you were at, the number of people to remove them would be, just like this human tragedy that no one can, I don't think everyone can even think about. But there's still there's this fear of this new America. So don't reform immigration, don't kind of broaden your appeal. So now it's become, those voters are illegitimate somehow, and they're cheating, right?
Right.
These accusations
right.
of cheating, and this is all in Jim Crow, and there was always this ideas of corruption and cheating among.
Every time, Democrats win, there's a cheating.
There's a cheating. It has to be cheating, right? It can't be, you just beat me fair and square.
You guys aren't upholding the establishment. Something happens.
You're not voting the right way, and
right.
And so there's, efforts at like kind of, voter suppression. It actually starts in a familiar spot with the Supreme Court. Was the Shelby County case down in Alabama, which I still to this day can't believe. I mean, I can't, I guess I should be able to believe, but it's still kind of hurtful to think that the Supreme Court would go after the Voting Rights Act like that, which is like probably been the most successful, that and the Civil Rights Act, the two most successful pieces of civil rights legislation we've ever had. And they worked, right? They're not perfect, but they worked. They did end Jim Crow. They did bring about changes important changes in this country. And they were actually renewed by in 2006, they're renewed over a bipartisan majority of Congress votes to extend them for another 20 years or something like that. And then the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, you can't do that. And it voids some of it takes away some of the enforcement power under the Voting Rights Act. And almost immediately you see laws coming into place to suppress the vote, right? To stop people, from voting, and usually Black folks, because they're kind of, because they're easily, in some sense, well, there's multiple reasons, but one of them is they're easy to identify and pick out and say, okay, we're not going to let them vote because it's so well known that they're a core constituency of the Democratic Party, right?
Correct, and they're a super easy target, right? If you look at the strains, right, the DNA strains of slavery, they're just a super easy target. Yeah, that's absolutely. Go ahead.
It's so easy to kind of go after them because it's on the census. This is where they live. We know that 90% of them will vote Democrat, so we're going to make it as hard as possible
for them, right,
to vote. And and this is
Georgia did that in Georgia. Oh, maybe we'll get into Georgia if you have enough time.
I know. No, you can see that, right? And you see you're right, when you have this dueling feeling when you see a huge line at a polling place, of people lined up to vote, and then the party was inspired, democracy. But on the other hand, it shouldn't take that long to vote. It shouldn't. You shouldn't need a lawn chair and a bag lunch. You should be able to I know where it's never taken me more than about 10 or 15 minutes to vote in my life. That's how it should be for everybody, but no, you make it so that, you might need the day off, or you might need, these other things. And, and so the, to just, even if you're not direct, you're not saying, okay, black people can't vote in this election, but what you are saying, oh yeah, but you're going to need like the whole day.
Yeah, the path to voting is going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah,
right. Absolutely. So, and I think you did a really good job really identifying the whole, people say, why are you mad? Like, this is why people are mad, right? Yeah. This is why the threat of having to share democracy with other people. Yeah. And then turn around and look at other white people and be like, hey, you're not one of us because you're supporting democracy, right? Yeah. So when you're looking at, how did it strike you that day, January 6th? Instinctively, I'll tell you, I was like, wow, this is unreal, because I can't believe that it's gotten this bad where entitled white folks will turn on the establishment. There are a couple teachers, cops, firefighters, retired Army vets. So what was sort of your reaction? You got to turn around and face kids the next day, No,
I know. It's like it was quite a thing, right? To see it happen, right? And there's some of the images that came out of it were just so it was almost like if you were writing a script for a movie, I'd be like, that's too obvious. You can't be that, you got to be a little more subtle. Like they showed up with a gallows, like with a noose.
Yes.
And they didn't have like a doll to put in there or something. It wasn't it was a real thing. And, and then they got the guy walking through the Capitol with the Confederate flag over his shoulder, and you're just
the shaman guy,
but he was almost a distraction a little bit, because it was because he made them look ridiculous, right?
Right.
And it was like it almost makes it easier. You can laugh at them and not take them seriously. But
what they're doing is one of the most serious things we've seen in history. So my question now is, what do you believe? Do you believe in it? Do you believe, honestly, what would they have done if they had found Pence?
Isn't that the $1 million question? I mean, that is a great question of the thing, because I think some of those people might have killed him, or at least in prisoner, right? And tried to. I think it was that they had, even though Pence didn't have the power that Trump said he had, right? He doesn't have the power. It's just a ceremonial gaveling.
Yeah.
It's not, he has no legal right to stop that, right? So he is completely powerless in the situation, but Trump got it in his head that he could do something, right? And then he told his supporters, Pence is failing us because he refuses to step up and act. And then I think they might have. Honestly, there was guys, there was zip ties, there was guys, there was guys armed, they were serious. Look, some of the people in the crowd were buffoons, but some of those people were deadly serious.
We're professionals. We're professional, possibly terrorists, right? And I just can't, and I'm thinking, I think the shock mainly in that, people who have a brain, right? It was how were they able to get away with this? But as related to history, this isn't anything new. And this is why I'm so glad I have you on, because we now are stuck back in the schools with a truth. We have to legitimately start telling the truth, right? No more sugarcoating, no more skipping any steps. And that's why I appreciate you being here and really dropping some knowledge around, for instance, Wilmington, North Carolina, and really helping us rationalize the threat of people who feel that their own personal safety, their economic safety, their mental safety. I have a saying about the whole community, people being scared to be around Black people. I think personally. Like, I think there's a lot of white folks who feel that their goal in life is to move as far away from Black people, but the only problem is that Black people feel the same way. Like, I think Black people want to move to Lincoln Sudbury because it validates who they are, and it speaks to a deeper effect of that strain of slavery. So, and there's a lot of people I talk to, and a lot of people who dares to watch this podcast. I mean, it's called Black Factivism, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, talk to us a little bit about the Willie Lynch letters, and and with the Willie Lynch letter. Obviously, we didn't prep for this, so but with the Willie Lynch letters, like, I feel like the guy was right? But in a sense, right? It was awful. It's an awful thing, right? But could you shed some light on the Willie Lynch letters? Because I think people have a hard time understanding. Their understanding of the Willie Lynch letters is very much a convoluted type view.
So could you just, I'm sorry, just jog my memory quickly on the Willie, like.
So the Willie Lynch letters was the letter that he wrote, the paper journal that Willie Lynch wrote about saying that, hey, listen, these people have been enslaved for so long. After a while, they'll start killing each other. You know, it's just the art of how to mistreat the slave in order to treat the slave. And we don't have to touch on it now. Yeah. But the art, I'm seeing some repercussions of the Willie Lynch letters, because I believe that a lot of times in my community is right. Willie Lynch came out and said, hey, listen, you could treat them as bad as you want. You could not allow them to read. You could beat them. You could rape them, but they'll get used to it. And then you'll find one or two of them you could give them freedom, but they'll always come back because there's always comfort in abuse, right? I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if we look at, for me, and I'm speaking, as a Black man, I see it. I see that the validation that is needed, right? For you as a white man, and who I believe is like, this is me, I always talk straight. Sure. Is compromising his white skin to have this conversation, because a lot of times you don't have to, right? You could just be a white guy and exist with the privilege all you want. Like, how is that? Was that an easy moral decision?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll just say about myself.
I mean, you only have it's a one answer thing, but like, yes, it's an easy one. I'll give you that, right?
Well, I guess I would say, I mean, I guess I think about like Everett, right? Where we are,
right?
Both educators at, right? My family goes back a very long time in Everett, right? My family were immigrants to Everett back in like the late 19th century, early 20th century. They were, Everett. Everett has always been kind of a gateway city, right? Of people coming.
Yes, in, yeah, and people don't even know what a gateway town is. Like, it's crazy.
Yes, Everett has been that for from the very beginning, right? And it's always been changing too, right? As it goes along. Like my grandfather talks about, he was Irish, born here but Irish descent, all. And then in like the 1940s, starts noticing there's an awful lot of Italian people moving into this town, right? And that to him was change, and Everett was changing, with it. Even though I think now people would kind of laugh to think that Italian people really changed Everett so much beyond. But then so that was but that was where immigration was coming from at the time.
Right.
So and then like Everett, now in the last 20, 30 years probably is now shifted again, right? And now immigration is here from from Brazil and Haiti and Vietnam and everything like that. And look, I know, and so I think people often talk about like Everett is changing, right? And it is in an ethnic sense, right? It has. There's no question it has.
I think it's the most diverse city I've ever been in.
Yeah.
I think it's like evenly split as possible, you know?
Yeah, it is. But I would say in a lot of ways, like the ethnicity has changed. But I think the people, I see so much of the same humanity in the people now that I see in my, my family, right? That grew up there. My mother grew up right on Broadway in Everett, and my dad grew up right over the border in Revere, right behind the cemetery on Howard.
Right.
And they got married, and they're both from big families. I have tons of aunts and uncles and stuff like that. And I more often than not, when I'm meeting our students who, are, there we still have a few Irish and Italian folks around, but not as
Yeah.
many. I see the similarity so much,
Right.
in them, and like not everyone appreciates that, right? Like I will say, I'm a coach, so I have a ton of like stuff with Everett on it, right?
Right.
Shirts,
Right. Me too. I just got some in the mail today.
yeah, I got all my Everett swag. So one night I'm going home from Everett after coaching, and I stop by CVS in the pharmacy where I live in Melrose, and I stop by the pharmacy in Melrose to pick something up on my way back. And I'm in the line at the pharmacy, and a woman who's working in the pharmacy behind the counter goes, "Oh, you from Everett, huh?" And I said, "Well, yeah,
Right.
I'm wearing the sign." And she goes, "It used to be a great place," is what she says to me. And I said, "It still is. It still
Right.
is just, like it was my answer, and she didn't like that very much, right?
Right.
And so we didn't. That was not my new best friend when I said
Right.
that.
Right.
So,
Right. She probably would have stormed City Hall.
yeah, exactly. She was not happy. I mean, maybe she was from there. She didn't like how how it has changed over the years and stuff like that. But I very much view it. There's a common humanity there, right? And I think that what often like, and this is we did the history of racism and everything. It's often taken to dehumanize the other, right?
Yes.
For me to look at you and not see a fully human person,
Right.
across the street.
Who is entitled to the same rights as I am.
Rights.
Yep. Go down the line. Yep.
So I will, and it's done to alienate me from you, right? To divide me from you, to keep us from working together, to keep us from even liking each other, right?
Right.
And then I'm told all sorts of terrible things about, what you will do, or whatever, why it's not safe for me to be around you, or any of those things. And none of that is true, right? And I know that to be true. I mean, I know that, obviously. And just not, and I guess I just don't want, and I want to kind of try to bridge that gap, right? I just think it's the right thing to do, because I look at this and I say, my family came here as immigrants, and not everyone was always excited to see them arrive. Like there was there's tons of history about the Boston Irish battling against the old school Brahmins in Boston at one point, and my family was a part of that, on the wrong side of that, right? I mean, I've been to Ireland where my family left Ireland in desperate poverty, right? And I went back to where my great grandfather was born, and I went to visit the British landlord who was there had this little mini castle that he lived in. It wasn't even all that nice, but he would have been the big shot of the local community. And it was a house, but it doubled as a fort, because every now and then my relatives would get sick of how they were being treated, and they'd come throw rocks at the house, or something like that. But anyways, my family at different times in different places has not always been accepted, right? And I don't have to worry about that, right? I'm in 2020, I'm the beneficiary of being a white guy in America, right? So I'm not, I don't have a story of woe or oppression of to me, but I know it's out there for other people. And I guess I just think about it as I would have liked it for someone to stand up for my family back in the day, right? When they didn't have anything, and I guess I just feel like now I'm here, and I want to to try to stand up for those folks who need it,
Right. Right. No, you're right. And honestly, I think we've come in such a space where we can't do it on our own, right? Like I used to just be like, I don't need no, I think we need allies like you to really help people. Like there's a book, right? White Fragility, right? And then there's another book, right? How to be an anti-racist, right? And folks are like, you need to read the How to Be an Anti-Racist book. I'm like, no, I'm not. I need people to read White Fragility first. And they're like, why? A white lady wrote that. I was like, well, because a lot of people will listen to her first.
Yeah.
Like, she's more believable than the guy who, and then after you read her, it will help you rationalize this Black academic writer that is Kendi. So like even like going through those dynamics is really crazy in itself, right? But it's just the journey for the truth, right? Like telling, like even like being in Everett, and you know, a lot of people are like, you know, that place is this is that. I don't know about that. Like everywhere's gonna have people who have the mindset, right? But I've met people with a fixed mindset already in my 6-7 months here. I met people with fixed mindsets who are now developing a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And part of it is exposure. It is general lack of knowing, right? I'm not going to be a white person. I don't expect a white person to wake up and understand all the things that Black kids go through.
Yeah.
Right. That's not, if any Black person is looking for that, it's not what we're looking for. Right. I think what we're trying to help each other understand is that the lives that we live are greatly different than white folks because of our complexion and the strands of slavery, right? Yeah. And people say, yeah, it's so long ago, and here comes you, the U.S. history teacher, is like, it wasn't that long ago, right? Like, no. It was not that long ago. No, so what hurt the most about the Capitol, that's what hurt me the most about the insurrection was, like, the nerve that this is just something I could never do. Right? Yeah. I could go get an ice cream right now. You can go get an ice cream. We'll both get the same ice cream. And we both love that flavor. Mm-hmm. But you could get, I could only get Oreo cookies. And you can get Jimmy's, you can get all of them, you know, and we don't understand that we're also advancing the message of inequity. I'll give you an example. When the Boston superintendent, the Everett superintendent, and other superintendents, I wanted to see what their messaging was. Yeah. And the message came out was like, hey, you know, this is a very unfortunate thing. The insurrection is awful, you know, it's just such a terrible thing. But I felt like they missed the point of why the majority of the demographic was mad. The kids didn't really, they was like, yeah, well, like, hey, they got enough money, in the kids' mind, they got enough money to do that. They can travel to DC. Lord knows where they stay. They probably could afford the Trump Hotel to stay in. They got enough money to do that.
Insurrections are expensive. Yeah,
yeah, right. We can't afford to do that. So when that messaging comes out, that is very empathetic to the insurrection itself, or the people who was inside. That's not what kids needed to hear. Kids needed to hear, hey, listen, man. I know whenever you guys speak up, you get met with bullets and you probably get killed and they talk bad about you. You know, it needed to be like, we understand that if it were you, you'd be dead. And it's like, that's what needed to be said. And that's the lens that we have to look at in order for us to move the needle on this work. And it's not going to be just a Corey McCarthy coming to Everett as the black guy. It's like, hey, Brendan, Corey, they at some point will probably have different views, but they understand the dynamics for moving the needle. So I truly, and that's what I want people to hear. And I think that's what people are going to get when they hear us having our dialogue. These are two people who never met before, right? But with the understanding, right, that history influences how people are treating each other. And every time we're making advancements, there's always room. We have still left the door open for others to say, hey, let's dial this back now, right?
Yeah, there's fear of that, right?
Yeah, it's like, and it's all, and I think one thing I've learned, like, listen, like, it's, yes, I never could point to at what point it has become a cycle, but I've always felt that way. And I'm grateful for you taking your time to do that. So how do your students, do you find that your students, because of how knowledgeable you are and how empathetic you are to the sort of like urban student struggle, Black and brown struggle, do you find that builds a better connection for you and them?
I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely, I mean, I think that, like, I think it is, I mean, one, just kids respect the truth, right? I think teenagers, I had a mentor of mine once said, and this is so true, he goes, teenagers have a amazing kind of detector for, like, kind of not being genuine or BS or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you said, you get to be an adult and you almost lose that a little bit. You almost, because you get into situations and you want to be polite and you kind of bite your tongue and you somehow that gets sanded off a little bit. You don't quite have it, but teenagers know it, and you got to kind of be real with them. And so you got to, like, tell them the truth, respect that they can handle it,
and guide them as if they can, right?
Yeah. And, like, but I find it, like, if you come with them with the truth, right, you say it, and you do have you have their attention, like, when it's real stuff happening to real people, like, that kind of, like, is like, oh, like that, like, that's when they I mean, I know that, like, when you start out, like, there's always that hard at the beginning of, like, how do I get this class of 30 kids to listen to me, right? Because they don't have to, right? And I think that just, like, you speak the truth to them, you tell them the truth, you are, empathetic about what they're going through, that I don't pretend to, like, have gone through it or like, I'm not, no, I am who I appear to be, right? But I'm here and I want to help you, like, this is a meaningful career for me. I spent 10 years working in the business world before I became a teacher, and
that's a tough transition though too.
Oh, it was.
Shout out to you. Yeah, that's a tough transition. And here's the thing: it's not really to want to have, like, some cultural competence in the classroom. It just really is not. You don't really have to always be academic about it. I try to tell people that all the time. I tell, like, when I do, like, my workshops and stuff, and I talk to these people from other districts, white folks, I just say to them, like, yo, all right, here's what you do. Like, majority of the teachers at one point I know have been broke, right? And I guarantee you, if you're having problems relating to kids of color, talk about that time you had no money in your bank account.
Yeah.
I swear to God, things will change, because a lot of our kids, because of all these cycles, they feel like all white folks are rich, and, like, or millionaires even, right? Because at that point, living in poverty, you're not really able to. Not say all of our kids are, because a lot of kids are not, but, like, majority are. Like, the reality is, right? Like, it's reality compared, like, the average Black family in Boston is worth $8, right? Like, come on. So compared to 240,000 to the white counterpart. So if you, that alone, it'll be like, Mister, what? Because you're sharing that. They're sharing that burden. You're showing some vulnerability. Like, and I think it's huge. I think people are still fighting that their vulnerability is not really trying to access that part of the student. You know what I mean? And you make a good point. I think we're both sort of in agreement about telling the truth. Because for me, on my end, if I don't tell the truth, when kids get to college, they're gonna come back and look at me and say, Mr. McCarthy, you lied to me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, they're gonna come back too. They're gonna come back.
Yeah, you know, you didn't tell me about this, but they're gonna turn and say to you, why didn't you tell me about this?
Yeah.
You know?
No,
and no one is thinking of the kids enough to ensure that the truth, like that the truth is being told, right? So like I think as you know, I get off this, I end this podcast, and you go on and you do, obviously we'll interact, you know, we work together,
sure,
but like understanding the impact that you can have and really like flexing on it will be greatly appreciated. I'm not saying you don't, but what I am saying is that the message itself and the historical context and not leaving things out is huge. And I'm glad that we have you to really talk about and identify those things. You know, because I think kids want to know, they want to know, how did we get here? They want, you know, and then just really identifying folks who along the way, like not the checkpoint Black folks, like not the Martin Luther Kings. It's fine, like Martin, yeah, we know, I have a dream, cool, you know. But who came after that? And who impacted who impacted policies? Who impacted laws? Who changed the game a little bit? And I think that's where we're headed. So yeah, I definitely think. And my last question for you.
Sure. Yeah.
My last question for you is, what kind of books are you reading? It's a very baseball question, but I love to know what kind of books are people reading right now.
Well, I have to admit, I've got a couple going. I'm usually kind of reading more than one.
Yeah.
So kind of, I'm listening to an audio book on Ulysses the life of Ulysses S. Grant. Who was the Victoria, you know, the Union general from the Civil War. But he plays a really kind of important part in all this because without him, it's hard. We might not have won the war. He's also the president during a lot of Reconstruction. And you know, he plays an important role in that, and he was for a long time thought of as a really terrible president. But even though one of the things he did as president was he suppressed the Ku Klux Klan. It actually goes away for a little while because of Grant, and then it comes back in the 1920s. But it's not the same. It's not a perfect through line. And he actually was a fairly progressive, you know, he had not been that way as a young man, but like a lot of people, he's changed by the war. But there was a real effort after the war, and especially after he dies, to destroy his historic reputation and elevate Robert E. Lee in his place, you know. And even though he's actually the military genius of the war, he's actually the one, and they kind of, you know, they you know, is part of this campaign to, you know, elevate white supremacy, you have to destroy Grant, right?
Right.
You know? And so I wanted to kind of know a little bit more about him, so I'm doing that. And then I'm doing another book, which is it's called Global Crisis. It's actually about, this is kind of I don't know, our students might be a little obscure, but it's about in the 1600s, we had a mini ice age on Earth and it was like climate, and what it's about is it was climate change, and it's a huge catastrophe for the human race, that about a third of humanity dies because of the little ice age, you know, and Chinese dynasties fall, and all these terrible things happen. And it's kind of like it's a history, but it's also kind of written as like a warning about global warming.
Wow.
You know, and climate, you know, we just saw down in Texas, right, with the power grid, you know, and going down, and, you know, they weren't prepared for that really cold weather, even though if we have, you know, climate change isn't about it rising 1 or 2 degrees, it's going to alter the entire ecosystem of this planet, and, you know, very quickly in a way that will be really disruptive to us. And so
I remember my first dose of climate change, believe it or not, was the movie Deep Impact.
Oh yeah.
You know, the lady, I think that's the one where she's hugging her father.
Yeah.
And then the waves just say, hey, I'm like, and then the water, you see the Statue of Liberty's head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I won't even be able to survive that. And I'm like, like, what would happen? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And let me say this. let me say this. I think, talk about Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah.
I think for me, I think we need to be more academic about the psychology of capitalism and the underlying ideology of it, right? That this is mine, this is always going to be mine. I was here first type mindset about it.
Myself.
Yes, right. And I think for Black folks to really understand that, I think we're doing some skipping, and I think that's why it goes back to Coates and all these other great authors who have this affection for the Civil War. And I believe we have to get, and this is the audience, challenge yourself to become more academic about how we're going to, because right now, those folks that we are talking about who still live amongst us, right? They're not going away. Like, I watched the CPAC thing over the weekend, and like, I'm not judging anybody. Hey, that's your politics. That's fine, right? But I'm a little bit invested in the truth. Like, if you were telling the truth, if you say, hey, Corey McCarthy just walks around in slippers all the time. Like, okay, cool, right? Like, yeah, and I don't like his slippers. Fine, it's a fact that we're slippers, right? You have your opinion. But don't be like, yo, the guy has 9 fingers and 3 eyes, man. You know, like, it's just not fair. And if we are able to help people rationalize from a historical lens how it has affected folks today, we can really get some change, get some changes that affect policies. Because the one thing that Americans as a whole do try to respect still is historical context, because it is a problem when it continues to repeat itself. And we're one of the few nations where history repeats itself. I'm saying it's very few. It hasn't, and I know, obviously my scope is limited in terms of that, but I know it hasn't in a lot of European countries. In my country, being from Barbados, we refuse to let it repeat itself. But here it's just becoming a cycle. So I do this at the end of every thing. Like, you may hate doing this, but if you don't want to get on your soapbox and talk about and say a couple of things, you can always tell us what you love about your job.
Okay. Well, I actually do have something to say about that. I thought about this in terms of like, sometimes this stuff can seem really depressing, right? Because you talk about all the bad things that happen, and it can lead you feeling hopeless. And I don't want to make people feel hopeless,
Right.
And ultimately, because I think that change is. I mean, I guess I'll die thinking that change is possible if we want to, And I think that what we got to realize, one is that is that racism hurts everybody. Right. And then obviously it hurts people like me much less than it does, people who are really going through it. So I'm not saying it's the same. I'm just saying that it kind of impoverishes us all in the sense that we don't have the social safety net that other countries do, because we don't have the labor, laws and all these things, because we don't see ourselves in solidarity with each other. Right. And so I think that seeing that, in each other, and kind of overcoming that and recognizing that if we work together to fight these things, we will all benefit to some degree to it, I think. And I think there's a very practical thing, a lesson that we can learn from the past that we can kind of apply to now to hopefully bring about change, which is, if you think about what one of the major failure of Reconstruction in the end is that that era Republican Party couldn't protect its own voters and couldn't protect their access to the ballot box. And that's ultimately what brought the whole thing down, right? Is that they were, unwilling or unable to, protect Black voters in the South and get them to the polls and let them vote and and have a free and fair election that we were talking about. Right now, the Democrats got in, right? They won the election. Regardless of what Trump says, they won a free and fair election. They are in power now. they got to deal with COVID right now because that's the immediate crisis, and they're rightly focused
Right.
on that right now. But there is a law that has been percolated. It's the John Lewis, I believe it's called, like voting
The
rights.
Voters' Right Act, yeah.
Voters' Right Act, right? And that is designed to protect Democratic, all voters really, like, because I can live with losing a free and fair election. I just don't want to lose one that I get cheated out of.
Right,
Like
right. And the cheating be a real thing. And that's
yeah,
what made it happen, right?
because the voters who agree with me couldn't vote. Like that to me is outrageous.
Right.
And so I think that but this law is going to come along. It's going to come around. It's coming through Congress. It'll probably come up later this year once the immediate COVID crisis can pass. And I would say that fighting to get that through Congress is probably is the test of this form of the Democratic Party here. Because you've already seen that there are already all these, they made up the charge of vote. Trump lied about voting irregularities, right? He lied about being cheated, and then people, especially Republicans, doubt the validity of the election, and then Republicans are using the fact that people doubt the validity of the election as an excuse to pass voter suppression laws. I saw. So we talked about, you mentioned Georgia before, where Raphael Warnock, right? Which is it's still to me I want to pinch myself to think that he could, that there's so much significance of him being the senator from Georgia,
Right.
To be the preacher at Martin Luther King's old church, and to come from that to be the senator from Georgia it's an amazing thing, right? But the Georgia legislature is right now going to make it much harder next time for Black folks to vote down.
And he only has 2 years.
And he's up again in 2 years, right? They're coming for him right now.
Yes. That's all about him.
It's all about him. It's about beating him in 2 years, right? Yeah. And by making it hard for people who support him to vote, right? And so you have to protect, and so those laws are coming, right? It's happening right now. And
do you think they can get them through?
Do I think Georgia can pass them? Yes.
No, do you think the Lewis Act will get through?
Well, it comes down to, it will pass the House of Representatives.
Yes.
I know, I'm positive of that.
Yeah.
The question is going to be, and this is
the guy in West Virginia.
Yeah.
Manchin. What does Manchin?
Joe Manchin think of this, right? Will he allow, and it's like, will you, and even if maybe there is some sort of face-saving way for him to kind of you say it's not repealing the filibuster, but you do, you essentially repeal the filibuster to get that bill through. But I think that is ultimately getting that law passed is the key to not making the same mistakes the Republicans made in the 1870s, which is that
I think people will appreciate that historical context of that, right? Yeah. But only a social studies teacher can push that view. I haven't heard it on any of the pundits aren't talking about it. The news isn't talking about it. But pushing that historical context, that's why sometimes I'm an independent, and it's very tough to really help, to watch I won't keep it much longer, but to watch Democrats just continuously just get beat up on, and just have such a short memory of what has been done in the past 4 years to them, and is that in all of fairness and just keeping to a particular philosophy, or is it just not having? I find Republicans to be more historically savvy than politically and historically savvy than Democrats. I do.
Yes, I would agree with that. Right.
Right.
There's lots of examples of that.
They just know it. They just know. They know the intricacies, right? And I think that's why they're making it so hard for them. So, can we get the John Lewis Voter Right Act through, and can we get $2,000?
Yeah, the 2,000 is going to come. Well, you mean the money's coming. That part's going to go through. I think.
So will it be 2 or 1,400? What do you believe? Do you think this is we're outside of our job now? Yeah. Universe, Spotify, Apple universe. Do you think it hurts our current administration if they give us 14 instead of the 2,000 after giving 6? Huh?
I mean, I would tell them to do, I'd say go full, I know there's a limit at some point.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd say 2,000 every month, like in other countries.
Yeah. But here's the thing, like, this is what people they got to get over. Like, giving people money is really popular, right? It just
Right.
is. Like, it's just some fun. People like the check. Like,
People like the check, and
they
they like
gamble,
the thrill, right?
like, and then they go like, you're like, oh, this is terrible. We really shouldn't be doing this. So, and they grab it and like, go put it in the bank.
Right, and that's what Trump understood.
He
Right.
did.
That's why he understood that people, they like their money, they like their low gas prices, they like, don't mess with my money, and we have to do a better job overall with the savviness of politics. Go ahead.
You're totally right. Because the Democrats need to kind of govern. I say loud and proud, right? They need to to do it, to govern, to do things for people and let people see them, right?
Right.
Like, I was like, you talk about Trump here being smart about the checks. He held those checks up in the spring for like a couple of days to get the Treasury Secretary's name off them and his name on them, right?
Yes.
And for a couple of days, people are like, oh, this is terrible. People are in trouble. You got to get those checks out. And Trump's like, well, that's, and I just say this, and I'm a fan of his, but I'll say this: Barack Obama never would have let those checks be. He would have just sent them out. He never would have delayed them for a couple of days because he would have been like, oh, people need the money, and he would have thought about it very technocratically and whatever. But he would have. I think he just would have sent them out, and that's a very just democratic and general thing. They didn't want the New York Times saying, "Oh, why are you delaying these checks?" And Trump's like, "No, you're going to get a check, and you're going to know that I gave it to you, right?" And so, like, I think Biden should call them. He should call them like Biden bucks, right? And he should be like that old, like the old
because as much as they hate him, they're going to spend the money. They're going to cash.
He should. I would take a picture of myself. I'd be handing out checks. I'd be like slapping the nightly news.
I'd be like the Celtics game with the gun with the check.
Yeah, with the gun, like, just handing them out. I'd just be like, here you go, like take your money. I think people appreciate. They want to see it, right? They want to see what they're getting, And so I get, my guess is it's going to be 14. If you're asking me to predict, I think it'll be 14, but that'll still be something, right? And they're talking about child credits, could really, to talk about like trying to cut child poverty. That could be a really good thing, a real practical thing that would help a lot of people, I mean, like the Democrat, they got to do that, right? I mean, they, like Obamacare, gave healthcare to like 20 million people. Like that's a huge deal, right? That'll,
a lot of rural Americans that still would be like, it's just hard to think. But you make a great point about not really like trying to stay on the negative, and there's a what history always teaches us is lessons that we could always try to learn from, and the resources are there. We just, a lot of times we don't use it, right? But the problem, and the thing is, for the Black community though, it's hard because we don't know what those lessons are, right? And we need people like you to continue to get that message out as well. So, Mr. Hahsey, did I say it right?
Hahsey,
Hahsey,
it's okay.
Mr. Hahsey, I cannot wait till we return to the building. And I could pop in your class and we could have one. I definitely want to have you on again. I would love to. My audience is pretty rangy. I don't know why. I think they listen because they don't like me, but I think some of them don't think that I'm like, I can't. This guy's gonna get fired. Like,
I'm fascinated to listen to a McCarthy hate listener.
I have a few of them. They're so funny.
A couple of haters out there too.
Oh yeah. And I love it. Right. I hate pain, but I'm okay with discomfort, right? So like that's just my thing. Like, hey, if you're uncomfortable, I'm cool, and I'm never really worried. Like, and even with the whole teachers and returning and union stuff, like, oh, just tell everybody what you don't want to do. Tell them why. Like, no, like I don't want to kill my mother. Right, like that's it. Like, or like I need these kids to learn. Like that's it.
I want to teach my kids to learn. I mean, I miss my son. I don't. Zoom is so hard. But I have a 3-year-old asthmatic son that I don't want to get COVID.
Right. Right. So that's the kind of realness that I think people.
Yeah.
Forget all the secrecy. Let's just put it all on the table, right? I'm all for. I don't have a union. I chose not to take a union, right? So my whole thing is like, yo, if somebody needs, just tell me who's going to be here and tell me who's not going to be.
Yeah.
And you want to know why? Because people have their own thing. They have their own stuff. And let's be, if we're talking about, I personally don't want to hear who will be upset if high school teachers get accommodations. I don't, because it's a different, high school and middle school are two totally different things, right? Like literally two totally different things.
Yeah.
So that's just, and my feelings are on, well documented. I just want folks to come back in September in their best space, and if that's what's gonna give it to them, maybe I don't care if anybody teaches anything for the rest of the year, other than no, seriously, if you come back and you're just working on folks' social emotional learning, and if you're really like building true connections and helping kids develop this path to come back as a better person in September, I am cool. It is March, so like that's because people learn kids learn. I've seen people teach algebra 1 in 6 weeks to kids. I don't, like, come on. Now, there's enough resources out there to get people a little bit caught up. And who knows if they're ahead or behind anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah. I mean, kids can get ahead. I mean, they can catch up. They're very resilient. We can all get back to the right. A lot of our kids have years before they're going to leave the high school. At which time we can help them between now and then.
all the supplemental programs, all the interventions. There's more interventions coming their way than you could ever believe.
Yeah.
But I don't want to keep you up. It's gosh, this is thank you so much, Brendan Hahsey.
Yes.
Yes. Folks, this is Brendan Hahsey. He is a social studies teacher at Everett High School. We are so glad to have him on. We hope to have him on again. Mr. Hahsey, I really thank you for telling the truth. I would have known when you were lying, but you did it. But I appreciate you. And on behalf of everybody who's watching, thank you very much. You have a good night, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll get this up live pretty probably within the next 24 hours, and I'll get the links in the atmosphere. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be on. It's my first podcast or anything like that.
You should do more.
Yeah, I know. So this is good. So thank you very much. I appreciate you having here and your enthusiasm to be in Everett, work with us, and like we haven't had to meet in person, but it's I am also looking forward to returning to normalcy in the building, and we can hang, and you're welcome in my class, whenever you want to come by, So,
I appreciate that. You have a good night and take care.
Good night. Take care. Yeah.
All right.